Here I am. Hello, everyone. Hi. I am sorry. I am messing with my video. It's so crazy. Hello, happy Friday. How is everyone? I am still getting used to it. I switched over to use kind of the YouTube studio itself, and I'll be honest, I haven't taken the time to sit through it and try to understand how it works, especially since I have a kind of problem with my video in the sense that it loses its zoom. So you'll sometimes see me go kind of like this because I'm trying to understand what happened to my zoom. How did I get all moved around and things like that? But it's okay. We're here. It's Friday. It's fantastic. We are going to continue the work that we have been doing. And I am extremely excited to do this work with you to continue this conversation. So if you're new around here, hello. My name is Tigria Gardenia. I'm a nature inspired. Actually, you know what? I have an intro. I'm just gonna share my screen and I'm going to show you the intro because I think that that's going to be so much better. Let's do that. Let's see. Hold on. To share the audio, I need to instead share the screen, which luckily I did make big. So I'm still system audio. There we go. All right. I'm still working on all of this. I promise I will get the hang of this. I've been doing lives for a long time, but I actually haven't been doing lives like using YouTube's tools. And I'm actually not 100% sure I want to keep using YouTube's tools. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to use. The important thing is to get the info there. So here it is. With that, I am going to, I can't even shut off my video. I don't know how to do that. And we're going to roll the intro. We're going to roll the intro, which hopefully I can do. Hello. Welcome to Plant Consciousness Commentary. I'm your host, Tigria Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor, coach, and the founder of the Naturally Conscious community. Known as a world ambassador for plant advocacy, I've spent over a decade working closely with plants, sharing their practical wisdom to help you embody the elements of life that nourish your evolution. In these sessions, I explore plant neurobiology, cognition, intelligence, humanities, and the birth of critical plant studies, all through the lens of personal evolution. Together, we'll break down the science to understand the mind of plants and how their wisdom helps us reawaken our own plantness, ultimately living an authentic life as a being of nature. I promise that soon I am going to get myself out of the video screen when I do this. I promise you I will learn how to use these tools. Eventually, I'm going to learn how to use these tools. Anyway, so that was me. Hi, welcome back. And let me give you an update on what we're doing here today. How are things going? Also, leave me a little message in the chat as you come in. Who are you? What are you doing here? How did you find us? Have you invited friends? That's a big one. Did you invite friends? Have you liked? Have you subscribed? All those important things that happen on YouTube. So I have been doing live plant consciousness commentary actually for a pretty long time, but I have to say that it's only been in the last few months that it's gotten really good. And I say this because I've had to organize all of my list. I've had to go through everything and the papers. It's probably because of the papers. We spent so much of our time going through the past to try to understand what it was that we were coming from, what were we even talking about. And now that we're kind of in it and we're in the good stuff, which is exactly what we're going to continue to do today. We're going to continue to go through the good stuff. This is the good stuff. And so I'm really excited about where we are. Okay. If you're new and you haven't watched the last two episodes, one of them is from December and the other one was from last week. Let me give you a little bit of a recap on where it is that we are, what it is that we're doing, how are things moving. Okay. So so we started with a paper. So remember, plant consciousness commentary. Our entire discussion here is to look at papers that help us understand co-creation with other kin, with plants, and also other species. We're exploring what is plant neurobiology, why does it exist, what is the controversy, why is that plant sentience is still a question mark after all these years. For some of us, the idea that plants are sentient is such a basic principle that the idea that there are people that are still arguing about this seems ridiculous. By the way, I'm turning on my light because darkness is happening and I have a huge window in front of me. And so as we go through this, my window, the light on my window is going to disappear. So I want to have my light on just in case. Anyways, so it's incredible for us to think that the word plant sentience is still controversial, but it really is. So is plant consciousness, which is even more controversial than sentience. Plant intelligence is getting a little bit more of acceptance. We walked through the history of even the idea that plants are intelligent beings and why that is important. And more importantly, what is still the controversy that exists there. So, but it seems to be a little bit more understanding that plants are flexible and that some form of the word intelligence is okay to apply to them. But when it comes to sentience, which gets very, very close to the concept of consciousness, man, up in arms. There's a lot of up in arms for some people. They just still aren't, they just aren't ready to accept that and to understand it. So Miguel Segundo Ortin and Paco Calvo, who, for those of you in the Plant Wisdom Book Club, will have remembered who Paco Calvo is because we read his book, Plants of Sapiens, and we had Paco come and give a great presentation to his whole vision of why plants are sentient, why plants are intelligent beings. He even struggles with the word consciousness, but that's because Paco is very, he wants to just dot all his I's and cross all his T's in all of this. So he's just being very, cautious. Let's just use the word cautious. He is. I'm still messing with this whole, by the way, I don't know if you all see it if you see in the video, you see that there's this little, hold on. Where am I? I'm trying to point it out. You see this little Tigger. It's not a really little, it's a humongous Tigger right there. New arrival in the house is, so as you know, my name is Tigria, which is actually a small South American feline. And this small South American feline, one of the reasons I fell in love with the name Tigria and really fell in love with this animal was because I have, for much of my life, been in love with Tigger. Love Tigger, have a huge collection of Tiggers, and especially in my 20s, Tigger was my companion. And it's really funny because I have moved in many countries of the world, and my Tigger collection has followed me. Not the entire time. I did have a period of time when the collection was in one place, but my Tigger collection has been very important. A little bit smaller than it was many years ago. Anyway, just the other day, I met this guy. And this guy is huge. And this guy was like, I'm coming home. And thanks to a dear friend, this little one is now a part of the household. So I originally was sitting on the couch and it was just so huge to sit on the couch. And you could just see this big Tigger sitting on the couch. I thought, maybe I'll put Tigger on the floor, not realizing that Tigger's face would still be above the couch line. So Tigger will be watching us throughout this, as is on this side. Hold on. No Name Dresenia, who's super my partner in crime for body stuff. And you've heard me talk about No Name Dresenia so many times. And over here is is a peace lily, which has no name yet. And there's another little one over here, which is another story. And I'll get into that story another day, not today. So I don't want to derail it. Okay, going back. So two sessions ago, because it was actually last month that we started, we read this paper, which is called Between Plant Romanticism and Denial, Science. It is a paper in the Journal of Animal Sentience. It was put out in 2023 because we have, in our journey, been going through multiple papers, and we've tried to go in a little bit chronological order. That is going to end probably after this series, because the truth of the matter is that we have there are so many papers in late 2023 and in early 2024, in all of 2024, that we're just going to go based on interest and importance and what we think is super cool for us to talk about. So this paper, Between Romanticism and Denial, Science, was put out by Animal Sentience, and it was really more of a call. Calvo and Segundo Ortin really wanted to invite the community. They gave the science, in their opinion, as to why the continual denial of plant sentience is ridiculous in 2023, in this case, when they published this, and they invited others. They gave what they believe is their scientific evidence, not their romantic evidence, not the way I would describe it is because, my esoteric speaking and spirituality, none of that. Science. This is why, not even philosophy. This is science as to why we believe it, and looking at the role of electrophysiology in understanding why plants are sentient beings and what that actually means. And then they invited the overall readership, other scientists of all disciplines, to investigate sentience in plants and to comment with their own philosophy. So last week when we met, we started to go through some of these papers. So we went through a paper called Insentient Cognition by Stephen Harnad. We went through Plants Detect and Adapt but Do Not Feel. Questions about sentience are not scientific but cultural. And for ethical veganism, and what plant science learned from papers. None of these papers are very, very long, but they. So I invite you to go and listen to that stream, because the reason why these papers are so interesting is because they really attack. That's not a good word in this context. Erase that word. They approach the concept of plant sentience from many different points of view and understandings. Now, so what we're going to do today is we're going to continue on this journey. We still have a bunch of different papers to go. I'm going to see if I can kind of bring this over here so that we have it, and I'll share it for a second so that you can get an idea of the list, and then I'll go and I'll pull up the first paper. Where are you? Over here. So here is the list. So this is, the original, and here is the list of all the threads, as they call them, which are all the different papers that were submitted. So again, we went through a few of these already, and today we're going to be starting from plants lack the functional neurotransmitters for signaling and pathways. And I have to say something about this paper. Before I will declare my bias before I ever read this next paper. This next paper, which is written by David Robinson, Michael Blatt, Andreas Dragun, Lincoln Tice, and John Mallett. Now, Lincoln Tice in particular, and I believe John Mallett also, we have gone through some of Lincoln Tice's papers in particular. Lincoln Tice is a plant scientist who does not in any way, shape, or form believe that plants are conscious beings, plants are sentient, plants are even intelligent, thinks that the whole argument is ridiculous, that we shouldn't even be having this conversation. Neurobiology proves it over and over again. And this is just something we shouldn't be even considering. So always going back to the argument about neurotransmitters. Now, when you look at Belushka, for example, and even Stefano Mancuso and a few others that have, and again, you can go back, if you go to tigriagardenia.com/commentary, you will see that there are many papers that we have gone through that have tried to change people like Tice's view. There's actually been replies directly to Tice that we have gone through that are talking about the fact that you're looking at neurotransmitters all wrong. You're looking at signaling all wrong, in the sense that you are using a strict human definition, and you're not even giving the opportunity for us to say separate but equal, in the sense that plants have a form of neurotransmitters. They have similar hormones to we as humans having, and they have this entire other way of signaling, but that is analogous to what is used for sentience in animals and humans. And honestly, we've talked about this multiple times here, where on the one side, there is an entire almost conditioning of humans as superior that makes it extremely hard for us as humans, for many humans, to kind of break down the walls to even seeing plants as sentient. It would change so much, it would impact so much, that even as we get close, and I include myself in this sometimes, even as I get close to sentience, there are some times where little tiny things in my behavior and in my actions I recognize for myself, who does believe it in a philosophical perspective and believes it in my interactions with plants. But when a plant is dying, or when a plant is my clothing, or when a plant is being used for something that is useful to me, there are moments when I selectively forget. Okay, I'm going to be honest. You can imagine how this must be when you have people like Lincoln Tice that are like, my entire scientific world is based on cutting up plants however I want, doing whatever the hell I want with them, planting them and making them grow, taking kin and kill them. Well, they would never use kin. They would say it, taking it and like killing it and manipulating it and changing the genes and all these types of things, all these things that in their minds they're doing for the betterment of humanity. Now, we already do this with animals, but at least there's an ethical conversation that is happening, and it's just different. Like, there are already regulations and changes to the way that we're interacting with animals, because we understand that we still think of ourselves as a superior race. So we can modify a pig's DNA in order to change and do something to their organs so that we can then kill them when we want to harness the organs for humans. But at least there are some people that are up in arms and having conversations about this. When you talk about plants, and especially when we're thinking about the entire food world, it becomes a little bit hard sometimes for us to say, oh my goodness, am I emotionally and mentally and psychologically prepared, especially given everything that's happening in the world, to have a conversation about whether or not plants are sentient? Because that means I have to have a conversation about my agriculture. I have to have a conversation about my furnishing sector. I have to have conversations about fast fashion. I have to have all these other conversations. So I get that people are not able. I don't understand why we don't call these things out. And only, I think, one or two of these papers that we've talked about so far has sort of started to bring this out. So last week's conversation is super useful for you to go back and look at, because some of these papers, especially the idea of plant sentience and the case for ethical veganism, which was, I think, fascinating to have that conversation of, well, if I start to recognize plants as sentient, then what does that mean for the way that I eat? What has to change? Am I not supposed to? Am I supposed to become a breatharian? So this is the conversation that we're having here. We're going to keep having this conversation. And especially once we kind of get through some of this like scientific stuff, and scientific stuff, it's all scientific, but I'm saying, once we start going back and forth between papers like this that are, to a certain extent, technical academic arguments, and some of the really cool editorials and papers that we're seeing around co-creation with plants. I have a few lined up about plants in cinema, for example, and what are the ethical considerations when you can take into consideration that a plant is sentient in cinema. The way that we've thought about plants as props rather than plants as co-creators or actors also on the sets that we're doing. These are all the types of conversations that start to spill out of, not even getting into words like climate change, not even getting into other things, but even just in a artistic perspective, which I think are the first pioneers, artists are the pioneers that are starting to bring this conversation to the forefront, because in their collaborations, they're giving space for the idea that there might be another way of interacting with plants. Hopefully, through that space that is a safe space, the artistic space, we'll eventually get to the place where we can actually have a conversation about things like food. But for right now, that's too scary. So we're going to talk hard science, which is where we kind of are today. Hard, not hard, because you know me, I'm hard, not hard when it comes to the science. And then the arts. Those are probably going to be the two big focus over the next few months that we're going to go through to give us an opportunity. That being said, if you are a person that is really interested in the real sciencey science, right? Like, what are these hormones and these neurotransmitters and how do those things work? You let me know, right? And I might try to slip one of those in every once in a while. I kind of am trying to find a middle of the road that gives us the opportunity to cover the scientific papers and break them down in a way that makes sense, while still not going down the complete rabbit hole that says, glutamate is used this way and therefore it affects because, Because we all know these things. Like not we don't know these things, but what I'm saying is we can all imagine that when you get down to the cellular level, plants are doing amazing things. The question is, how do we interpret it at the whole body level? And how does that change our interaction with plants, our ability to communicate with plants, and our discussion? And I've been having this conversation a lot with my plant partners. The other day, I cleaned my house from top to bottom. And in part of that cleaning, I took many of my plant partners around here and started to look at and have conversations about how are you, what do you need, it's the new year, do you want a new pot, do you need other things? And for example, as I've started to work with Noelle, the Christmas cactus, which is my new business partner, and as once Spider Plant went into retirement and kind of which is a whole other story. One day I'm going to do a full podcast episode about that because I just think it was such a slow transition over the course of the year for me to get into. Anyway, not going to go there. Noelle the Christmas cactus, who I talk about in, I believe it is episode 90 of my podcast, where I talk about how, Noelle kind of came into being and how Noelle is not as chit-chatty. I really need to pull Noelle into the picture. Maybe I will in a minute. Like later on, I'll bring Noelle in here so that you can actually see Noelle. Noelle right now has been very silent. I don't want to move my camera for fear that I will never be able to get it back to the position in which it's in, which is very possible. And there my video just did that weird zoom thing that it does. Explain to me why it does that? I don't know. Anyway. Okay, let's get into this next paper, which is plants lack the functional neurotransmitters and signaling pathways required for sentience in animals. So let me find this one. Plants lack. There it is. Now remember, Lincoln Ties. I just have to say that because he is a character. At least we're discovering from his. I don't know him personally. I've never actually met Lincoln Ties. It's one of the ones that it's not a scientist that I have seen yet in any of the events that I have gone to. By the way, speaking of events, the Plant Initiative, super excited. I got a beautiful message from the director of the Plant, the Plant Initiative, to say that they're going to be doing kind of like a summity type event in June. And they asked me to be one of the speakers on plant communication. Super excited about this. So keep an eye out for that. As soon as I have information about it, I will be sharing it. I just realized that I am scrolling and I haven't shared my screen. So let's share my screen because I think that that's going to be a little bit more useful. Okay, so here we are. We have plants lack the functional neurotransmitters and signaling pathways required for sentience in animals. Commentary on Segundo Ortin and Calvo on plant sentience. So here are all the different people who contributed to this and where exactly they are in the sense of what, Germany, UK, Germany, California, and University of Idaho. And I have to breathe deep because sometimes these guys go into the weeds. But remember, hold on. Egyptian mint tea. It's just so good. With a hint of matcha, because this is the same mug I was using. I was drinking matcha from earlier. Okay. I'm skipping the abstract for 1 second. We're going to come back to it because I want you to see who these people are, not necessarily their pictures, but more of what it is that they do. If you remember from last week when we had this conversation, going and seeing what exactly it is that these different scientists are specialized in helped us better understand the papers that they were talking, like what they included into their papers. So Robinson is in plant cellular biology. So here is a plant scientist specifically into, again, the physiology. Remember I was saying scientists that tend to work on the physiology of plants, in my very humble opinion, and could be wrong, have to imagine that if you recognize plant sentience, whether they are conscious about this or not, means I can't dissect this plant the way I want to in the future because I kind of have to ask the plant to permission. Now, those of us that work a lot with plants know that some plants will probably give permission. But the whole thing of permission for a plant scientist, I don't think they're ready to go there. Blant is instead a professor of botany. So he is an electrophysiologist studying mammalian plants. Now, electrophysiology, if anybody has ever listened to the music of the plants, The music of the plants uses electrophysiology in the sense that we as human beings have an electrical system, right? Our synapses fire in electrical type of responses. Plants have one too that is even more sophisticated than the one that we have. So an electrophysiologist is somebody who is specifically working with that sector, like that part of plants. It's extremely important because a lot of signalings that plants do, not only are there the chemical signalings, but many of the signaling, which is what we consider to be behavior. Some of us would say thought process and the way plants think. Others would say that that's going too far. Take it wherever you want to go. But that all happens through the electrophysiological system of a plant. So then we have neurophysiology in Dragun. And this is a person who is working on molecular, biophysical, and cellular mechanisms of synapses. So this is a human person, right? Neural networks and patterns of neural networks. This is a person who is focused on the human side. And I say this because it is important. Plant neurobiology and human neurobiology are two separate fields. And while there are some neurobiologists that have crossed over, and it's been fascinating to see this, not all of them have. As a matter of fact, most of them have not. And then there is the famous Lincoln Ties. Lincoln Ties is a molecular biologist, right? He works on the structure and function of evolution of ATPs. Anyways, so he is all about plant physiology. Again, another one that dissects and chops up and does all those itty bitty little things with the plants. And then Mallet, who is who works, it sounds like, on animal groups, especially vertebrates, and on the evolution and nature of consciousness. So they brought in a person who works on consciousness specifically in the world of animals, vertebrates, not even invertebrates, but vertebrates, like the more structured, close to the human as possible, ties, and all these other peoples, one that works on synapses and neural functions for humans, and then electrophysiology, which is all of the world of signaling in plants. And then you have these different realms of study. So now with that in mind, of understanding who these people are, full half hour of of discussion on my end. That was good, man. I haven't ranted. I've actually been, I think, sharing pretty fairly the I'm actually talking about. So let's get into this. Let me. I'm trying to get better. If anybody has, short of having an assistant on the call, which is eventually going to get to a necessity, I have to figure out how to keep time of what I'm doing. Okay, abstract. We cannot, look how they already start. My God, didn't I already tell you this? I haven't even read the abstract, but I knew that they would start like this. Let me prepare for my very scientific voice. We cannot agree with Segundo Ortin and Calvo that plants are sentient organisms. I think they could have just written that one line and then that's it. Like, let's just stop there. Let's just read there. We don't have to add anything else. We just say that. We have critically examined several aspects of their target article. Several, not all of them, several. No, that was nitpicky. Oh, I knew that they would go down this way. And find their claims are not supported by the published evidence. We address these claims in sections on whether plants have neurobiology analogous to that of animal nervous systems, including neurotransmitters and synaptic receptors that respond to anesthetics, which is, of course, a big discussion, the fact that plants respond to anesthetics, which means that they have to have something that allows them to shut off, right? So that's where that sentience/consciousness comes into. And whether plant signaling resembles neural transmission. For the latter, we especially consider the unique way plants signal their responses to wounding. Although the plant vascular system has been compared to the animal nervous system, animal blood vessels would be a better point of comparison. So they're like, don't try to go with this high-end animal nervous system. You should just think about the way that blood vessels inherently respond. Okay, let's get it. Not to be, okay, it's obvious, and I declared it at the very beginning, that I have a bias against these folks. And my bias against these folks is the fact of them not calling out their own biases. I think that's my main bias. My main bias is that they don't call out their own bias. That's my bias to, deal with. Anyways, the gravest danger to a speculative biologist is analogy. Let me finish this quote and then I'll say something about it. It is a pitfall to be avoided. The industry of a bee, the economics of an ant, the villainy of a snake, all in human terms, have given us profound misconceptions of the animals. Steinbeck and Ricketts. Okay, I can agree with some pieces of this, but we need a frame of reference. We need a frame of reference somewhere. I don't think it needs to be only analogous, but if none of you are willing to do meditation with a plant and you're not willing to get into a conversation with a plant using something that science today can't identify because plants have more senses than humans do, and therefore we as beings that evolved from and with plants probably have other senses, and so therefore when I get a hit of something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's woo-woo, although it is woo-woo, but it's not woo-woo in the way that you're thinking of it. It could just be a sense that you don't recognize yet, and that maybe in 50 years or 100 years we will recognize. Until we can get to a conversation about things like that, then analogy is pretty much all we have. All right. Anyway, sorry. I'm gonna stop ranting. Introduction. Claims for plant sentience or consciousness have been made numerous times since the advent of the controversial field of plant neurobiology in 2006, which we covered almost all of those papers, almost all of them. In the target article, Secundo Ortin and Calvo state the goal of plant neurobiology is to understand how the information signaling mechanisms across the root and shoot systems that give rise to intelligent behavior are in plants integrated and fine-tuned. In its original formulation, plants were proposed to have functional equivalents to synapses. Palushka still says this, always has says this, continues to say it. I saw him a few months back when I went to a conference, and he still talks about this. To transport auxins in synaptic-like vesicles and to perform neuron-like electrical signaling via the vascular system, especially the phloem. Subsequently, additional animal characteristics such as hearing, seeing, feeling pain, consciousness, and memory were introduced to the plant neurobiology concept. We have challenged the validity of these claims on numerous occasions. Oh, trust me, I have read all of those papers, all of them. We have read them together and have argued against plant neurobiology's heuristic value for understanding plant behavior. We continue to adhere to the standpoint that plants are neither. So since 2006, you have your idea. Nothing has changed your idea. You continue to hold steadfast, even while multiple scientists have changed ideas. Doesn't that say something about you? Okay, maybe it's just me. We continue to adhere to the standpoint that plants are neither cognitive nor sentient in the sense that these terms are commonly used in psychology, ethology, cognitive, and neurosciences. In this commentary, we comment on several, hey, I do the commentary, okay? We comment on several neurobiological properties that the target article claims are shared by animals and plants, and thus pointing to plant sentience. These erroneous equations demand clarification, if not refutation. Strong, man. Strong words. I think they're really getting frustrated, especially with Calvo, because Calvo has probably had more public back and forths with these scientists. I should call him because I'm super curious as to his thoughts on this. I don't know if they put out I think they do put out a final paper at the very end. We'll find out. As with other articles, so plant neurotransmitters and anesthetics. So this is the direct claim that plants have analogous systems to humans for neurotransmission and the reaction that plants have to anesthetics. Mind you, the whole part of the anesthetics has been gone through with a fine-tooth comb in multiple papers. So it's really interesting that they still feel the need to call this out from their perspective, notwithstanding the fact that it has already been discussed, debated, quote unquote, proven in multiple forums. Anyways, let's see where they go. As with other articles hypothesizing plant neurobiology, Segundo Ortin and Calvo attribute to sentience the fact that 1. Plants have some of the same molecules that act as neurotransmitters in animals, and 2. Anesthetics reduce plant responsiveness. Kind of like plants, they faint or not faint. They go unconscious, which means that they must be conscious to begin with. As defined by Wikipedia, you literally used Wikipedia as your source? That's unusual. I did not expect that. A neurotransmitter is a signaling molecule secreted by a neuron to affect another cell across a synapse. The cell receiving the signal, or target cell, may be another neuron, but could also be a gland or a muscle cell. So this is a neurotransmitter signaling molecule. So it's a compound that is a neuron creates it to affect another cell across a synapse. So this little connection goes and it moves over it and it affects the other one. The most common neurotransmitters are glutamate, which plants have, gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which plants also, and acetylcholine. The former two are found in the phloem of plants and act as signaling molecules, but do not fit the definition of neurotransmitters because plants lack synapses. They love saying this. In plants, glutamate signals are involved in growth, development, and defense responses, where GABA increases stress tolerance, which increases stress tolerance, activates antioxidant enzymes, facilitates photosynthesis, and signals development and growth. It is to be noted that these roles are hormone-like and unrelated to what expected of neural activity. In other words, you might have the same compound, but it's not doing the same thing. That's pretty much what they're saying. Same compound, doing a different thing. Therefore, even though the compound is the same, it doesn't really matter. Where instead in saying with glutamate, it doesn't go across, it seems like, because they don't go across a synapse, even though glutamate is pretty much doing the exact same thing that it does in humans. Not even in humans, in animals in general. Let's get into the glutamate itself. Glutamate receptors exist in plants as glutamate receptor-like ion cells and are structurally similar to their animal counterparts. However, as just mentioned, this glutamate receptor system performs many plant-specific physiological functions that nervous systems do not perform. Duh, it's a plant. The other's an animal. Different beings. It makes sense that they act somewhat differently. GABA receptors are also found in plants, but have little sequence homology to their animal counterparts. Have you ever thought that the problem is that you're using tools and mechanisms that are used for animals to read animals in order to read the plants, and that maybe the plants are actually doing the analogous type of things, but they're just doing it in a completely different way? It's a question. It literally is a question that I want to ask because I don't ever feel that they state that. Like, I don't feel like they say in the papers that I have read, like, we tried this, we tried to think outside of the box. I'll give you an example. You all know that I have this sort of passion for, I wanted to be a lawyer. So I love court. I love court stuff, and I love legal analysis and court commentary and stuff like that. And one of the cases that I'm currently following right now, they just had a Daubert hearing. I'm not going to get into what it is. Anyways, they had a big hearing because they were trying to figure out if the assessment by one of the doctors, one of the not expert witnesses, is actually going to come in, if it's going to be something that they're going to allow, because it's a very unusual case. Anyway, to make a long story short, so that I don't go off on a rant too much, the thing that's really interesting in it is that, as a doctor, you have to do this differential analysis where you think you know what something is, right? You see a wound and you think it happened in a certain way. And in the case of somebody who's either deceased, like a coroner has to do, or in somebody who is maybe unconscious, you have to be able to figure out where that wound came from. Now, of course, in an emergency such situation, you have to do this very quickly. As a coroner, you have lots of different things, which means I have to introduce a whole series of different concepts, and I have to test and try them out to see. And so they got into this big conversation about how this sort of differential diagnosis, or this ability for you to kind of explore other ways that these wounds could have come to be, is so important in trying to understand what the wound really is, either for treatment or for analysis of it. And the doctor is supposed to, in the report that they do, spell this out. Like, what are the different things that I analyzed, right? What are the different concepts that I went onto? So if it looks like a dog bite, I can't just assume it's a dog bite. I have to say, well, what happens if the person was, fell on a knife? Would it make the same kind of wounds? What if the person was scratched by somebody with super long nails? Would it make the same kind of wounds? Like, you have to look at all these different concepts. And I think it's super cool to see all the things that they ended up ruling out. I never see any of the things that they ruled out. I'd love in some of these papers for them to put in all the things that they ruled out. Like, we tried to think of this in this way and then we tested it and it didn't work. We tried to look at this in that way and we tested it and it didn't work. I think that that would be so useful. Don't you think? What do you think? If you do think that, let me know. Let me know in the comments because I really think that that's important. Anyway, glutamate and GABA receptors are gated ion channels. They evolved earlier than nervous systems. Since glutamate and GABA in plants, plus their receptors, differ from neurotransmitter systems in many ways, in using these molecules as evidence for neurological similarities between plants and animals. Does the way volatile aesthetics affect plants indicate plant sentience? In animal neurons, the principal targets of anesthetics are. This is going to get a little nerdy for a minute, but we knew that because we knew who it is. Then we'll get to some of the more philosophical arguments after this. But let's get into a little bit the nerdy. So bear with me if you don't like the nerdy. Ask questions, doodle while you're concentrating on something else or draw. What was that? What was the term we just studied a term that I can't remember. It's something graphics. It's like the idea of like, it's kind of like doodling. Why drawing helps you, focus your attention. Anyway. We're going to get a little nerdy for a second. In animal neurons, the principal targets of anesthetics are ion channels, e.g., ligand-gated receptors for glutamate and GABA and voltage-gated potassium plus channels. Since glutamate and GABA receptors are present in plants, it would appear to be a sensible strategy to investigate the effects of these drugs on plants. Indeed, a number of studies have documented that volatile aesthetics block sensory reception. This is basically anesthesia blocks reception, but also responsiveness. That's the word I'm looking for. Inhibit diverse plant organ movements, disrupt vesicle trafficking, and paralyze venous flytrap movements. Although a direct effect on plant glutamate and GABA receptors remains to be demonstrated, it is known that anesthetics do interfere with long-distance transmission of electrical signals in plants and with transport across plasma membranes, particularly to suppress the entry of CA2. Anesthetics also lead to strong reprogramming of gene expression akin to heat shock stress. On the other hand, so this is all the stuff it does do that makes it similar. On the other hand, anesthetics have so many specific, non-specific, and phylogenetically universal effects that it's difficult to tell whether the plant-animal similarities are homologous. For example, anesthetics are likely to target glutamate receptors in both plants and animals, the similarity, but in plants, their only known effect on these receptors is on the electrical wound signal called a slow wave potential, which animals do not produce. Another example of the difficulty is that although anesthetics affect vesicle-mediated transport in both the plant Arabidopsis is a type of oh my goodness, I just blanked on it. I'm like looking at it. It'll come to me. Anyways, it's the plant that's most often used in a lab. So Arabidopsis. And in animal synapses, it seems too big a leap to equate these vesicle effects because anesthetics have so many additional effects on synapses, and because plants lack synapses. It is safer to conclude that the differences are more important than the similarities, for the major reason that plants do not show the disrupted neural networks and that dominate animal responses to anesthetics. Thus, the similarities are too sparse to support the hypothesis, repeatedly proposed by plant neurobiologists, that plants are sentient organisms merely because they lose responsiveness under anesthesia. I love that he doesn't even give them an inch, like not even an inch, this is a really interesting, and because there are a number of similarities, what would be better to do is that before declaring blah, 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 it would be great to do the following experiments. But no, it's a categorical, this isn't true, even though there are some similarities. Notice that they do not discuss the similarities and what they could possibly mean and why are they similarities. This would be the useful study. What would be useful collaboration is saying, hey, there are a number of similarities. I wonder what these similarities mean. Oh, it drives me nuts. Is signaling in plants similar to neurotransmission? Action potentials. Action potentials is how plants transmit. This is the whole electrophysiology thing that I was talking about earlier. The fact that both plants and animals have action potentials, which is, these bursts of electricity to signal something, was a basis for the plant neurobiology concept and remains so up to the present time. The resulting propensity to look for neuron-like characteristics in plants seems to have become the idée fixe among plant neurobiologists, despite the fact that the electrochemical origin of action potentials in nerves is completely different from that in plants. Just because it's different doesn't mean it doesn't serve similar functions. Of course, the physiology is different. Our physiologies are different. Involving calcium 2 influx rather than a nitrogen influx. Ooh, God, I always get my elements mixed up sometimes. I think that's nitrogen influx. Moreover, the propagation of plants' action potentials is 100 to 1,000 times slower, and unlike neural action potentials, is associated with a wave of elevated systolic calcium 2 plus. Whereas neural action potentials are osmotically neutral. Plant, again, different but similar. Plant APs serve for osmotic regulation in aquatic plants such as chara, drive somatical closure through osmotic Tuger pressure in land plants, and are responsible for the rapid closure of the venous flytrap. As emphasized by Kelchova et al., such electrical characteristics do not imply higher sensory function. Thus, and in contrast to the suggestion of plant neurobiologists, there is no electrochemical equivalency between plants and animals. How is it that so many other people say that there is? Slow wave potentials are wounding. Plant neurobiologists overemphasize on action potentials as the major factor in electrical signaling in plants, unfortunately diverts interest away from the other types of electrical signaling which are unique to plants. Because we don't know how to measure whether or not, if we were to just say that they have all this other stuff and that means sentience, you would say that we were wrong. The best studied of these signals is a slow wave potential, whereas action potentials conducted along the phloem are often responses to non-damaging stimuli such as touch. Slow wave potential signal a plant's defense responses to destructive wounding. However, it should be noted that the most severe wounding triggers are phloem action potentials and additional long-duration slow wave potentials signaling. In addition, wound-induced slow wave potential have been shown to mediate direct plant-to-plant transmission of systemic physiological changes in plants and systemic acquired acclimation. Enormous advances have been made in the past decade in understanding the transmission of leaf-to-leaf wound responses, although the exact roles of some of the participating factors remain to be clarified. It is now clear that unlike electrical transmissions in neurons, wound signaling in plants involves at least two different types of elicitors. One is glutamate, principally found in the phloem, and the other is carried in the xylem. These are the so-called Rika's factor, which are that. I'm not even going to attempt to say that word. Both elicits triggers the production of slow wave potentials, followed by a wave of, hold on, let me see where we're getting with this. Because even I get a little bit like overwhelmed when I have to try to think about, say the words, and explain what all of these different pieces are. I'm trying to see if they say anything this is getting into the actual science, which it's great. And of course, I'm always going to include these papers for you so that you can find them and download them and read them yourself. I'm trying to get to what is it that they're actually trying to say. So they're showing all the reasons. This is very similar to the argument that we just saw above, where it's all the reasons why what you're saying is not good enough. Here is what we're looking at in signaling. Here's what's happening. This is a complex form of electrical communication unique to plants. Here's the thing. If you can admit that there is a complex form of electrical communication that is unique to plants, that you don't understand exactly what's happening and whether or not there is, what's the word I'm looking for? Give me a second. That there is conscious attention on, in other words, it is deliberate, that's the word I was looking for, deliberate action, then you actually can't say that plants are not sentient because you don't understand what these complex electrical communications are actually saying. So what you're saying is these things that we're seeing are not similar to humans, and therefore that must mean that plants are not sentient. Like, do you understand how kind of almost limiting this entire conversation is? There is no way comparable to the transmission of electrical signals in neurons. Moreover, and most important, especially in terms of sentience consciousness, is the fact that plants lack any form of reciprocal communication. That is, while there are forward signals traveling from the site to the stimulus to the site of the action, there are no feedback signals. This contrasts sharply with the heavy reciprocal electrical signaling seen among neurons in the brains of conscious mammals. This is the first time I've heard that piece. I'd have to do a lot more research in order to better understand it. So, is the analogy of a plant vascular system to the animal nervous system valid? Comparisons are often made between the vascular system of plants and nervous systems of animals. Even though plant vasculature lacks cells with synapses, which contrasts with animal neurons, many of which have thousands of synaptic connections to other neurons. But you yourself are saying that neurons are not the way that the communication is necessarily happening in plants. So it makes sense that the vascular system wouldn't have produced a whole series of synapses and a whole series of this mechanism that, even according to you, is not exactly how plants are communicating. The question is, does it have an analogous of a different form, but in the same sort of quantity? That could be one point of comparison that could be interesting to see. Many of which have thousands of synaptic connections to other neurons. And of course, the plant vascular system has no brain. And now we get to the heart of it. No brain. It's mean. No consciousness. No brain, no consciousness. I really think that the human neurobiology world that does not believe in plant consciousness should create like a little sign that says no brain, no consciousness, so that we can kind of see them in public. It's like, be able to like, oh, okay, I'm not going to have a conversation with you, because if your only argument is no brain, Instead, plant vasculature is better compared to the blood-carrying vascular system of animals. Both these systems function to transport water, nutrients, mineral ions, and hormones throughout the body, and both conduct electrical signaling over distances. More specifically, phloem conducts action potentials and slow wave potentials, the latter with the help of xylem cells for long-distance signaling, and independently, animal vasculature evolved voltage transients in its endothelium and musculature to modulate resistance to blood flow by regulating vessel diameter. Say that in a sentence 3 times fast. Both plant and animal vascular systems use electrical signaling to regulate the hydrostatic pressure. Thus, xylem and phloem cells are arguably more analogous to the endothelial cells of animals' arteries, which also lack synapses, than to the neural cells of the nervous system. Similarly, the relatively simple networks of vascular tissue present in plant shoots are more comparable to branching animal vascular networks than they are to complex neural networks. Importantly, vascular networks, unlike neural networks, are not directly involved in the mental functions of animals. Plants and animals have both vascular networks, but only animals have neural networks. You know what I think would be really interesting? Actually, I'm going to read the concluding remarks, and then I'm going to tell you what my thoughts are. Based on the foregoing, we are of the opinion that the relentless search for analogies in terms of electrosignaling between plants and animals is futile intellectual exercise with limited practical value. The differences between plants and animals in this regard are so significant that attempts to draw conclusions about sentience in plants are simply not justified, nor pedagogically useful. Thus, the humanization of plant life, or more correctly, the application of plants of terms from mammalians to sensory physiology, seeing, hearing, feeling, consciousness, intentionality, has no solid scientific basis. It perpetuates an anthropomorphic bias and misleads the uniformed reader. Okay, I'm breathing. I am breathing. Okay, let me say this. Here's what I'm going to say on this. I think it would be really interesting, and I think it should be an academic exercise everybody should be including too. If you remember some of the papers, or at least from a conceptual perspective, some of the papers with Paco Calvo that we've gone through, he has done this work. So I actually think that Paco is, hold on, I'm turning on another light because it's starting to get dark. And then that means that I get into low light situations, which is really bizarre in the way that my video kind of works. I don't know if this is going to make it better. We're going to try. Okay. Maybe not that much better. Come down a little bit. Okay. So the way that we've seen Paco Calvo do this, what I'm about to say, which is, I think it should be a requirement of almost all scientists that at some point in before that they can publish their papers, they have to at least do some level of scientific research in the opposite of whatever it is that they're arguing. Not because I think it's going to change the argument, because it might not. But if you argue the opposite, when I used to do debate many, many, many years ago, I did a form of kind of ethical type of debate called Lincoln Douglas debate. And when I did this Lincoln Douglas debate, one of the things that I really enjoyed that we were sort of forced to do was that we had to go through the opposite sides possible debate strategies, right? And it really helped us to think about our argument in a more complete way, right? And in some cases, it changed the entire strategy because you started to see things that you hadn't thought of before. And I think that that would be extremely useful to do as a scientist. I think if I study the idea of plant sentience, I think it would be super helpful to spend at least some period of time going after, like, studying the idea that plants are not sentient, because I think it would really help us to understand what it is that, like, it would help us see a more complete picture. This is my opinion and my opinion alone. So that was the first paper that we went through. So let's move on, right? Because there's so many of these. So the next one is stress, an adaptive problem common to plants and animal sentience. So this, it seems like, is a pro argument, because of course they don't state it clearly in the beginning, which is understandable, right? We're trying to get to the heart of different ideas of, oh my goodness, go away. Sorry, my reader tried to, like, add other pieces. Okay, hold on. Where's my view? View in there. And then let me share my screen. You start getting a little bit doing these things, right? A little bit better. Okay. So here we are. This is Uzlem. I'm assuming Uzlem Yilman, which is an independent scholar in Scotland. Ooh, we'll have a woman. I actually asked this question the other day, and I have to admit, it is a question that I have no answer to, because I can look at it. I wasn't remembering whether or not we had hit any female scientists yet, and I was wondering if there was a correlation. Maybe that's me looking for biases myself, but a correlation between whether or not women were pro plant sentience and men, like, obviously men are on both sides of the fence because the majority of scientists are men. But I was wondering whether or not there was a preponderance of, are women more pro, or do women also kind of evenly stack on both sides of the plant sentience argument? So let's see where it is. So Uzlem Yilmaz, cool name. Silverman is a professor of biology. So she has 2 PhDs, one in biology and one in philosophy. So I don't know if Paco has multiple PhDs, but he is very similar. He's in the world of biology as well as physiology, because he is a biological philosopher. So he also steps in those. She was a Marie Curie fellow, which is freaking cool, because those fellows do some really cool stuff. At the University of Exeter, and currently doing research on early 20th century plant biology. Oh, I'm going to need to check out her website. I'm super curious. Okay, let's see what side of the world she is. She is talking about stress, which is an adaptive problem that is common to plant and animal sentience. It is very hard. Let's see, can I make this a little bit bigger? Oh, not that picture. That we go. It is very hard to determine whether plants have felt states, but they do have specific states, such as stress, that depends on sensory input from their environment. Plants do not have neurons or brains. Okay, the neuron thing, we agree, is not direct neurons. Some would say neuron-like. Taz and company would say absolutely not. So for the sake of argument, let's go with no neurons. And of course, we're all in agreement with no brain. But they do have xylem and phloem, up and down, water and nutrients, as well as many signaling molecules that are dynamically distributed in their bodies, enabling them to produce systemic responses to environmental stimuli. One common topic in plants and animal science is that may or may not prove to involve sentience, but that does involve the same molecules is stress. Secondo Ortin and Calvo argue for taking that the plant might be sentient hypothesis seriously and testing it rigorously. Remember, their original commentary, their original paper was not about saying sentience is a definitive, because again, Paco tends to be a bit cautious about these types of things. He doesn't really like to go too headstrong until he can, in his mind, totally prove it. He's very, very cautious, as opposed to somebody like Mancuso, who's like, plants are sentient. I don't care what you say. I'm a plant physiologist. I've been doing this a long time, and my word is enough. It's kind of his way of thinking of it. So their whole argument was like, here's why we think this does exist, why plants are sentient. Let's sort of start taking it kind of seriously. Let's start taking it seriously, similar to what I was saying about what I thought the previous paper is, that they should have to argue their opposite side for a while. They should have to do a little bit of research on the opposite just to see. Okay. Their target article is rich and important, pointing out an interesting and controversial topic and highlighting the need for its rigorous investigation. Again, they're asking for more research. It describes many thought-provoking experimental findings and their underlying plant biological processes. The debate and controversy on plant cognition and sentience are productive, as opposed to the other group that is saying this isn't even useful. It's not even, not only is it not true, it's not even useful. Okay, this starts to drive me nuts. Like halfway through this, my monitor tends to like move over and then it's so annoying. Anyway, I'm trying to fix it. Okay. Let's see. They're productive. They contribute to plant science in developing and rethinking concepts and methods and in providing new knowledge about plant life. There is much for researchers on animal cognition and sentience to learn from plant science. Scientific concepts often change, and there are many debates and developments within animal cognition and sentience research, including debates on the criteria for sentience. Because even there, if we agreed that everything is sentient, fishing would completely change. So would a lot of hunting. So would a lot of stuff in general. It's very big topics. Secondo Ortin and Calvo point out that the interest in plant sentience emerges from observations of cognitive capacities in plants. This is true, but considering whether plants are sentient is not a new question. It is connected with many other evolving ideas about organisms, science, ethics, and ecosystems. The thesis that all biological organisms are machines has been addressed directly in the context of plant sentience. One can think of cognition as a basic capacity of all organisms. Yeah, you and I can think of that, but I can think of a few scientists who don't think that, including single-cell organisms such as E. coli. Organisms have evolved various kinds of cognitive capacities through evolutionary processes, and plants have their own ways of cognicizing. There is no center in the plant cognitive system. It is a distributed, a coordinated set of semi-autonomous processes running over the organism and items in its environment. Biology is a broad discipline with many areas of specialization in which comparing and sharing concepts has always been important. Different branches of biology sometimes share methods, tools, ideas, and concepts. One such concept is stress. Its history is particularly interesting. Plant diseases have been recorded since as early as 1700 BCE, and there was research on microorganisms causing diseases in plants even before the development of germ theory in the late 19th century. Ooh, I love that she does plant history. This is super interesting. Plant researchers did not use the term stress for such conditions until after the term had become established for organisms in general by the 1930s. There may be a connection between the stress state and sentience. I had never thought about this. The target article describes sentience as the capacity of an individual to have felt states, including sensory experiences, external or internal. It is hard to determine whether plants have felt states because you can't ask them. I can ask them, but my idea on this, and probably the idea of many of you that are listening to this, is that, science doesn't really care about that piece. Although, if you go, but this is why I love, Side note, I don't have any kind of sound or anything like that. Side note, this is why I love the Plant Wisdom Book Club. I love our Plant Wisdom Book Club because when we get into reading a lot of these books, when we get into reading these books by people who have been working closely with plants, many, not pants. I'm hopeful some of them might be wearing pants, maybe some, anyway, sorry. When these scientists and others that have been working closely with plants start to share their experiences, we hear just how many of them actually started off by communicating with plants. Now, they might not admit it. They might not put it into those words. But let's be honest, that is what they're doing. Like, they're listening to the plants themselves. They're communicating with the plants themselves. I mean, come on. It's so obvious. It's so obvious. So the Plant Wisdom Book Club is fantastic because we get to read all these books together and have these long conversations about it. And actually, at the end of the month, on the 31st, on Friday the 31st, we will have the author of the book that we're currently reading, The Love Language of Plants, Sydney Kale, will be joining us for the final discussion. And I'm so excited to have this discussion with Sydney because her book is definitely communication with plants because she co-wrote the book with the plants. And so there are these rich, beautiful, poetic-like experiences that she is receiving through transmissions from the plants directly, which she puts on paper. Of course, she is not a traditional plant scientist. She is an ecologist. But that's the whole point. And even some of these traditional plant scientists, when you read their paper, when you read their work, even Paco Calvo himself, you can read between the lines that you know that these ideas didn't just come out of nowhere. The plants he was working with fed him a lot of the concepts that he is introducing. That is my take only. I am not defaming or saying that Paco Calvo is a plant communicator in a traditional sense. I am saying it seems like it. Seems like it in my book. I don't know. You tell me what you think. If you've read Sentience, you let me know what you think about that. All right. The target article describes sentience as the capacity of an individual to have felt states, including sensory experiences, external or internal. It is hard to determine whether plants have felt states, but they do have specific states, depending on sensory information from their environment. Physiological processes occurring during stress responses in plants are examples of such specific states. Plants do not have neurons or brains as animals do, but they have xylem and phloem as well as many signaling molecules dynamically distributed in their bodies and enabling them to produce systemic responses. The affinities between animal and plant sentience in the context of stress is illustrated by GABA, which we've already talked about that word. I'm not going to say it again so that you can just laugh at the way that I pronounce it. A molecule that accumulates in sesame plants under various stress conditions. This same molecule is also a neurotransmitter inhibitor in animals. As Pessoa notes in his commentary, explicit comparisons between plants and animals may be useful in many respects, completely contradicting what was just said in the previous article. Don't you just love science? I love scientific debate for this reason. You can have one thing and you can have something else on the other side. I think it's absolutely amazing. I think anyway, I just think it's so funny. The response of plants to conditions such as stress tolerance, stress avoidance, stress resistance, and stress escape are extremely complex. They involve intricate physiological processes that depend on diverse genetic, epigenetic, environmental, and developmental factors. Terms like avoidance and escape that are used to explain plant behavior under stress conditions clearly have some connection with the way they are used in studying animal behavior. It is only natural for plant biologists to inform themselves on animal research from time to time and vice versa. These interactions can occur in various ways, reading each other's work, thinking through analogies or homologies, drawing inspiration from each other's methods, tools, and findings, conducting collaborative research, and engaging in open, multi-specialty peer dialogue as we are doing here. Summary. Sentience, feeling, is hard to determine both in animals and plants because, of course, not all animals talk. And so, therefore, it's hard to know what they're feeling. I found it so ironic that here, in the previous paper, they were talking about don't anthropomorphize. But how do you think you read what a dog is thinking? You're anthropomorphizing. You're looking at the dog's behavior and you're looking at comparisons to human behavior. And you're saying, oh, if the animal covers their head or hides in a corner, that must mean they feel shame. That's exactly what we do. We don't know if the plants feel if the animal is feeling shame, but because we see this behavior that for us is shameful type behavior, we assume. The same with like the way that they develop their facial features. It is known that in wild animals, like wild dogs, don't use eyebrows the way that domesticated dogs do, because that was developed as an interaction with humans. So who knows? Maybe the more plant communicators we have out there, the more we will start seeing behaviors that plants do in order to react to what it is that the humans are telling them. And I think that now with time-lapse photography being something that you can have on your phone, time-lapse video and stuff like that, it might be really interesting to see if over time we start to see things that we couldn't recognize, because if you go and you talk to your plant every day, you don't really notice the behavior. But if I go and talk to my plant for 6 months every single morning and say, grow to the left, I don't know, just throwing something out there, and I record this over the course of 6 months, could I see the plant growing to the left over time? I think that this is an interesting type of experiment for us to do. These are the kinds of things that even us as individuals at home can do. We can start to carry out the research that allows us to help the overall scientific community do the things that they themselves can't do because funding is scarce, because you have to kind of placate your university or things like that. But we as individual, like, contributors, we can do citizen science is amazing for these types of things. Citizen science is the ability for us to contribute to a body of work. So if you do an experiment like that, you let me know, because I want to see it. I want to see what you did. I want to hear about it. And so go and ask your plant to grow to the left. By the way, I just noticed that Jaina, which is an aloe that lives with me and is one of my one of the houseplant roommates, just has a little bud. Jaina's putting out another flower. You go, Jaina. And I know you're too big, but I can't put you in a bigger pot right now because I don't have a place to put you. If I put you in a bigger pot, I can't put you where you are, which is on a windowsill. And Jaina's already at the limit. So, I'm sorry. We will figure something out. Okay. Sentience is a state. Summary number 2. Summary 3. Stress, like sentience, is a state. Stress occurs in both plants and animals. 5. Stress may not be sentient, be a sentient state in animal or plants, or both. The same molecule, GABA, is involved in both animal and plant stress. Hence, comparative as well as collaborative study between plant and animal scientists of stress, sentience, and behavior, cognition, is likely to be useful and informative for both plant and animal science. Can you please directly hand this off to the group from the previous paper? I think that if you were to do that, would be quite useful. See, this is okay. Take note. This is a female who did this, and she seems to be open. She wasn't pro plant science, sentience. She was open to it. So that was our second paper for today. Gosh, I'm going slow. All right. Which was all about stress. And I think that was really interesting. I'd love to hear what you think about it. If you think it's interesting, leave me a comment. Here's the next one. David A. Booth, Sentience, back to the science from the words. Sentience, back to the science from the words. Okay, hold on. Let me open it up. It takes me a minute. Sentience. There it is. And I did prep everything this time. I prepped it for last time, but the time before that, I wasn't really ready for everything that would be included in this. Okay, let's get this queued up and let me share my screen. Now I understand why people end up doing 6-hour live streams on YouTube. I'm not going to go 6 hours, folks, but I kind of almost understand how it happens, because you get on this roll, and between the comments that you're kind of going through, it takes a minute to queue everything up, get everything ready. It's like, okay, this is our third paper, which is Sentience, back to the science from the words. This is a psychologist. Ooh, exciting. Okay, we've had a whole mess of neurobiologist, plant physiologist, plant electrophysiologist, consciousness type of biological consciousness researchers and such. That was the first paper. Second paper instead is somebody who does research into the history of plant biology and of plant work. And now we're going to get to a professor of the School of Psychology in Sussex, and his studies is working on individuals' lives in their usual surroundings, including mechanisms of human and rodent food intake and of human cooperation. That's an unusual thing. I do like that he studies cooperation. I think that's super cool. Okay, let's see. Here's the abstract. I'm so curious as to where this person's going to go. Contributors to this discussion acknowledge ambiguities in the terms used, including feelings, behavior, cognition, and sentience itself. Yet, if they continue to use such words without reference to scientific criteria established, yet they continue to use such words without reference to scientific criteria established by experimental psychology. In other words, I think you have to have a little bit of a glossary at the top, and you have to define your terms. And I do think that in this particular kind of work and this kind of research, it's super, super, super important to do this, because these are words that are used across disciplines, right? This is transdisciplinary work. And therefore, if you're going to cross over from various disciplines, you really need to define your terms clearly across all of these different disciplines. So let's see what David Booth tells us. The use of science are not strictly specified until there is a consensus among relevant experts on the empirical evidence for distinguishing their reference, such as protons versus electrons. The key terms in the debate about sentience in plants and draws conceptual distinctions among them, allowing that some are fuzzy. Through appropriate experimental design, psychological science has made clear factual distinctions among phenomena variously claimed to relate to sentience, grounding discussions in agreed facts rather than disputed concepts. All of these are disputed concepts. That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. Would speed progress in collecting and interpreting relevant evidence from individual members and different species, as well as human engineered artifacts. The word feel is ambiguous between the broad categories of sensations and affect. This is so true. So true. Each diverse in its usage. Sensation can refer to the processing of stimulation by the sensory organs and the brain. Problem is, plants don't have brains. As well as the way people discuss this. Affect can refer to emotions and moods, but also to motives, intentions, or purposes and actions. A feeling might be both sensation and affect, such as feeling comfortably or uncomfortably, hot or cold. But the two should not be conflated. The boiling water in the pot is not feeling hot, reacting angrily, or taking action for the cook, because it is not transforming informational content between input and output. There is just the agitation of atoms throughout. More broadly, that's a good example. More broadly, the words behavior and cognition mean the same thing when expertly used. There are a lot of scientists that would disagree with the statement, right? That's been a big piece, which is like behavior does not show cognition. He's saying that it could if you put it in the right terminology. Right? Information content is transformed from the selection among inputs into a choice among the options for output. Thus, behavior is not movements of the body, nor any sort of output observed without reference to the input that influences it. Cognition is not thought without content. There is output as well as input, along with the processing between them. Attention may be on output, decision-making, input, perceiving, or the reasoned or reactive transformation of input patterns into a momentary pattern. Contrary to Harnaud's distinctions 2 and 7. So wait, hold on. Just for frame of reference to make sure I don't, crutters. I opened something I'm trying to open. Now I got to reclose it again. No, go away. This is the problem when you're streaming. You have okay, wait. Harnaud is one of the ones we read. Harnaud was the first one we read in Sentient Cognition. So that was last week. So you kind of need to go back to that one and just make sure of it. Okay. I was like, I remember we read this. I wanted to understand it better. Okay. Uh, Here we go. Contrary to Harnad's distinctions 2 and 7, feeling something is observable and measurable by analyzing individual organisms and machines, output-input performance. First, behavioral cognitive performance must be distinguished from mere physical causation by identifying inputs that account for each output. Behavioral cognitive performance. Okay. Then we may be able to measure a sophisticated interaction among input-output relationships that amounts to feeling something. Seeing a white patch surrounded by a cyan green in an impressionist painting feels like seeing red. The analogy holds. The felt red can be matched to the actual red patch surrounded by gray. Unicellular organisms transfer specific stimuli to specific responses in taxes such as movement up and a concentration of gradient of a particular chemical compound. Plants show tropisms. Remember, tropism is the way that a plant senses, right? I have gravitropism. I sense the gravity, and therefore I grow towards the direction of gravity, such as growth into light and against gravity. The bean shoot in Segundo Ortin and Calvo's video might multiply cells at its tip and collapse randomly sideways when gravity overcomes turgor. Turgor is the pressure, without any external influence. Nevertheless, the shoot does bend towards a source of light. The same phototropic, growing towards light, behavior occurs when shoot tracks the movement of the sun across the sky. Actually, that's heliotropism, but whatever. Yet the rotation through the full 360 degrees seen in the video requires additional input. Does the point of anchorage provide a stimulus that is transformed into rotation in the same direction? Then does the shoot's contact with the bean pole induce a bend or the rotation? The crucial question is whether the bean shoot circling up the pole is separately controlled response, or is it fully explained by a combination of the simpler transformations of input into output. If quantitative modeling of the behavioral data shows that the shoot can operate under a distinct construct of circling higher and higher up the stick, that could be a first step towards granting that the plant has some sort of implicit awareness of the bean pole. So basically, wow, that was a hard one. I mean, the beginning part was super easy to understand, right? He's talking about the fact that, we have these terms, especially in the world of psychology. They have spent so much time parsing out these terms, understanding how to define them, really giving them their clear definitions. And then all of a sudden, here trying to apply them to plants without being very specific as to what exact meanings you're calling for. It would be more useful for you to do that. That being said, once you do that, you need to take the experimentation or the way these terms are being used in a psychological model and then apply them towards what you're doing with plants, even if your answer is, I have questions, and then see how the terms play out. Because if you already have, sorry, I have this little hair that was trying to, I don't even know, I can't tell. Anyway, if you're trying to apply terminology that has a clear terminology, but you're not using that clear terminology, then you run the risk of causing more, problems. Fair. I think that that's totally fair. I think that's a fair assessment. It's a fair assessment. I actually kind of like that one. I don't think he was for or against. I think what he was trying to say is that there is an argument to be said that some of the wording that we use, if applied correctly, could better help you make your argument for. I think that that's what I read into it. Okay. So now we have the next one going. Are these interesting? Because I'm having a blast, but I don't know if you all are. Today's one of those days where everybody's quiet. The chat is quiet. Everything is quiet. I can engage. Ooh, I don't know how to do that. So wait, here we go. I'll do a little poll because I don't know how to do this. So no, I'm kidding. I'm not going to do it because I don't know what I'm doing yet. I told you I'm still learning how this whole studio works. Okay, so we went from David A. Booth to Doug Leonard. He is Leonard Dung. Excuse me, I got his name completely wrong. From Animal to Plant Sentience, is there credible evidence? Interesting. From Animal to Plant Sentience, is there credible evidence? So let's see who this person is and why are they talking about whether or not there is credible evidence, which of course we think that there is. Let me share my screen. Share it off. Off I go. Off I go. They're short, right? But they take a minute and they got some punch to them. I mean, some of them have some punch to them. Okay. So here we are. We have from animal to plant sentience. Is there credible evidence? Is there credible evidence? This is Leonard Dung, who's the Center of Philosophy and AI Research. He's a postdoctoral researcher, so he fellow for the Center of Philosophy and AI Research. He does research on philosophy of cognitive science, very useful, particularly consciousness and artificial intelligence. Why is it that it's so much easier for us to have a conversation about consciousness in the realm of artificial intelligence and instead of when it comes to plants? You know, I did a whole session on that, which is super interesting because this article came out that was talking about AI and consciousness. And you should see how much easier it was in this particular article, which is indicative of many articles that we've read and many of the papers that we've read, for them to have a conversation super fluidly with no sort of argument. No, that was argument, but I'm just saying not like what we're talking about right now around the idea of an AI being conscious than when it comes to plants. Like the vitriol sometimes that comes out, or the one of the content creators that I follow would say the shade that comes out from people like Lincoln Tice and crowd. And I think it's just because, you know, again, going back to that whole central argument that I keep saying to all of you is how much of life would have to change if we agree that plants are sentient? We're barely scratching the surface of this with animals. Can you imagine if we threw plants into it? Oh my goodness. I can just see vegans yelling at me because I've seen it before, because I've had it happen to me. Okay, let's get into this abstract because then I get off on tangents and then we've actually only gone through 3 papers so far, but it's been fascinating. And I feel like I'm going fast. Am I going too fast? I don't know. We'll see. Let's get into it. Secundo, Ortin, and Calvo argue that plants have surprisingly varied and complex behavioral repertoire. Which of these behavioral capacities are credible indicators of sentience? If we use the standards of evidence common in discussions of animal sentience, the behavioral capacities reviewed are insufficient evidence of sentience. I want to see his criteria for this, though. I'm super curious as to he has adapted his criteria from animals to plants or whether he is straight up using animal, because it does change. It does change the weight I will give it. Of course, my weight doesn't count for anything, but it's still the weight that I would give it. Even if some putative indicators of animal sentience are present in plants, it is not clear whether what we should conclude is that plants are sentient or that those indicators are inadequate. I like this last comment. This last phrase is, I think, super important, and I'm glad that he included that. Okay, I'm gonna give me a sec, and then I'll get into this. Let's get into it. Yeah, it's my little Gur. Here, you can look at Gur while I. Oh, the other way. Here. Okay. What can I say? I don't know. I'm a child at heart. So I showed it to you last time, right? My lip gloss. This is so cute. Gur. I keep calling him Groot. By the way, Gur is a character. Gur is a character in Invader Zim, which is my favorite comic book, and my favorite cartoon is Invader Zim. I love Invader Zim. They don't do it anymore. It's an old one, and it was amazing, and I wish they would bring back my tall ones. And Gur was a character in that. This is Groot. Sorry, Groot. I am Groot. Okay. a little view into my world. If you were to see my desk, you'd laugh. I don't have a lot of objects because I've become somebody who's not very good. I don't like having a lot of like stuffs around, but I do make that my sort of stuffs that I do use. My practical stuff has to be cute. So, for example, I have an entire collection of notebooks. These are my notebooks, and this is Gorgeous by Santoro, who I absolutely adore, and I have a lot of different gorgeous things. Can't help it. Love it. Anyways, moving on. Introduction. Drawing on growing literature, Secundo, Ortin, and Calvo review evidence of surprisingly sophisticated behavioral capacities and electrochemical activity in plants. They conclude that we should take seriously the hypothesis that plants, too, might be sentient. With the term sentience, they refer to the property of having states which subjectively feel like something, what philosophers called phenomenal consciousness. In this commentary, I sketched some issues relevant to evaluating the author's behavioral evidence of plant sentience in the light of what is currently regarded as credible evidence of animal sentience. If plants do not meet the criteria for attributing sentience to animals, it is hard to see how attributing sentience to plants can be justified. Or, as you said at the end of your abstract, which I agree with, maybe these are the markers are inadequate. And I think you should have written that in that sentence right there. Assessing animals and plants consistently. Two main questions are, is there strong evidence that some plants have behavioral capacities? Why some? Why can't it just be plants? Plants. Because if you cannot tell me, just the same as I don't believe this for animals, by the way, I do not believe that consciousness like developed in some and not in all. Like it's in one or it's in all. It's in none or everyone. This is just as my opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion too. And I want to hear your opinion. I want to know what you think. Do you think consciousness is an all or nothing type of thing? I mean, I'm talking about even alive things. Let's not even get into the idea that everything consciousness, which from a Demonhurian spiritual physics perspective is definitely a valid discussion, but that is outside of the realm of the science that we're looking at today. So let's focus on the science. Focus. I actually don't believe that much in focus, so I like my random thoughts. Let's go. Anyways, two main questions are, is there strong evidence that some plants have behavioral capacities that researchers count as credible indicators of sentience in animals? And if plants have these capacities, should we actually infer that they are sentient? Secondo Ortin and Calvo mentioned 10 types of capacities we seem to find in plants. 1, communication. 2, kin and species recognition. 3, decision-making. Ooh, man, that one gets a lot of people. I've had a lot of arguments with researchers about the whole word of decision-making. Anyways, 4, risk sensitivity. 5, anticipatory behavior. 6, learning and memory. 7, foraging and competition. 8, mimicry. 9, numerosity. And 10, swarm intelligence. All 10 capacities are relevant to the complexity and sophistication of plant cognition. Shelvin has argued that with respect to artificial sentience, taking a breath, general intelligence is useful heuristic for ascribing sentience. If the same is true in this context, all 10 of these capacities seem at least somewhat relevant to questions of plant sentience. Nevertheless, to make a strong case for plant sentience, one needs evidence which speaks directly to the question of sentience, not just general cognitive complexity. A strong case for plant sentience could be made if plants had many of the capacities which are typically regarded as credible evidence of animal sentience. Why still? I would love to have at least one paper that says, we don't actually know the answer to this because we don't know how to evaluate sentience in plants. I want a paper that says that. That is not the same paper saying plants are not sentience because the capacities, the markers that we have for sentience, plants don't fill, but one that literally says it took us forever to come up with markers for animal sentience, which are not even universal because there's tons of animals that we don't even declare as sentient, even though, in my opinion, they are. And so therefore, it's way too early because we're having this conversation all backwards. We're trying to decide sentience from animals rather than going through the same process that we used for finding out what are the markers of sentience in animals through to plants. Maybe if we adapt, anyway, okay. 5 recent comprehensive overviews classifying indicators of animal sentience are Snedden et al., Birch et al., Dung, Crump et al., and Dung and Nguyen. In considering the indicators of sentience that these 5 papers propose, 2 putative pieces of evidence of plant sentience particularly stand out. First, as Secundo Ortin and Calvo point out, there is evidence that plants can engage in complex decision-making, integrating and weighing information from different parameters and trade-offs, and prioritizing responses to improve this channel of survival. Second, they argue that plants learn via habituation and perhaps classical conditioning. Yes. In the animal sentience literature, motivational trade-off behaviors, i.e., behaviors which flexibility trades off between rewards and punishments and their respective um, is standardly seen as credible evidence of sentience. In fact, in fact, 5 of the overview papers listed above mention this paradigm explicitly. Secundo Ortiz and Calvo's review of risk sensitivity show in the 5 overviews as well, capacities are regarded as oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. Wait a second to see if it went away. Okay. In the 5 overviews as well, many other works, learning capacities are regarded as important indicators of sentience. Thus, Martin and Calvo's discussion of learning and memory seems relevant to the questions of plant sentience. However, it is noteworthy that the orthodox view in the animal sentience literature, supported by considerable empirical evidence, is that simple forms of learning, including some forms of classical conditioning, do not require sentience. Thus, even if findings of classical conditioning in plants could be not that it's not worth it. We haven't gotten there yet. To take stock, when we evaluate posed for assessing animal sentience, we get a mixed picture. One may argue that the evidence of decision-making in plants appealed to by Secondo Ortiz and Calvo is indeed credible evidence of sentience. By contrast, the known learning abilities of plants are insufficient to speak to the question of sentience. For the other behavioral capacities reviewed by Secundo Ortiz and Calvo, it would be intrinsic to spell out the rationale for why they might count as evidence of sentience. Which specific features implicated in sentience are supposed to indicate? Are they supposed to indicate? 3, should we trust system sentient research? I like this. This is thorough. This is good. I like it. There is further complication, however, in treating behavioral capacities known from the animal literature as evidence of an plant sentience. Please take me in a good direction because I like this. Suppose you learn that plants possess a certain behavioral capacity you thought was too sophisticated for them. There are 2 types of reactions you might have. First, you might think that plant cognition is more complex and sophisticated than you thought. Second, you might think that the capacity in question requires less complex and sophisticated cognition than you thought. It is not clear which option to prefer in any given case. In probabilistic terms, this is footnote 1, where you update your degree of belief in accordance with new evidence, you should have both reactions simultaneously to some extent. Consider motivational trade-offs. Irving takes the fact that C. elegans, a worm whose nervous system comprises only 302 neurons, 302, displays motivational trade-offs behavior as evidence that motivational trade-off is not sufficient for sentience. So wait a minute. So the worm does something, but for you, that's still not good enough. Why? I'm sure that there must be a big paper that explains why, but I'm super curious as to why. Did you just decide that, because I can do it, it probably means that that's too low and therefore it shouldn't count? But it counted before up until the worm did it? I want to know. I want to know these things. In the same vein, so curious, Mason and Lavery argue that because certain organisms not considered sentient, including plants, but isn't that what we're here to argue? So therefore, it's a circular argument. If you say, well, plants do it and they're not sentient, therefore, when somebody else does it, it's not sentient. Nevertheless, have certain capacities. These capacities are not sufficient indicators of sentient. Yes, but there's a circular argument in here. Perhaps in response to these concerns, Gibbons et al. Study on bumblebees supplemented the motivational trade-offs between noxious heat and rewarding sucrose solution task with a memory component. Since the trade-offs depend on associative memory, this study increases the demands for information integration. I know of no evidence that trade-offs that rely on associative memory can be performed by C. elegans, let alone plants. Just because you don't know of any doesn't mean that they can't. We just might not have devised a study for it. Hence, if we decide that passing this version of the trade-off paradigm is actually what credible evidence of sentience requires, then trade-off paradigms provide insufficient evidence of plant sentience. In conclusion, to make a strong case for plant sentience, it is necessary to show that plants have behavioral capacities that count as credible evidence of sentience when they occur in animals. Currently, this criterion has not been met. But there's a circular argument in there. You do see that, right? Moreover, there is a methodological issue. When plants have particular behavioral capacity, we often take that as evidence that the behavioral capacity does not require sentience, rather than as evidence that plants are sentient. This methodological issue would benefit from explicit discussion in the future. I agree with the last piece. I agree that this would benefit more discussion. I think really interesting argument. It's one of the arguments I've liked the most because I do think going back to all of these conversations we're having about terminology, I think there is a big issue here around terminology. And so I would really like to see this terminology thing addressed kind of head on. I think if we dressed the terminology situation head on, I think we would get somewhere else, which would be super cool. I mean, I do definitely think that it would be an interesting perspective. So that was from animal to plant sentience. Is there credible evidence? So now, continuing on with this discussion, okay, we have Taya Brooks Preback, language matters. Okay, I'm happy that we're heading. I like the way that I don't even know if they organize them this way or this is how they came in, but I am liking the idea that we're about to get into where language matters. Hold on a second. Let me cue this one up. What are your thoughts so far? I'm so curious as to what it is that you think about this argument. Is this interesting? Because I think all of these comments are totally enhancing the way that I see this entire discussion. And so I'm very appreciative of them all. And I am enjoying all of these conversations. I cannot tell from the picture. Let's see. Here we go. I like that the picture also has has cute little, so cute that she, anyways, language matters. So this is Taya Brooks Preback, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences in Sydney. So this is a PhD, is a scholar and multidisciplinary artist. I told you, I love artists. I love the artist. The artists are good. The artists help us think of things in a very, very different way. Hold on a second. My phone is going off and I don't know why. Okay. It's not. Okay. So we have living in Australian Blue Mountains with sheep and other animals. Her recent publications include the Nautilus Award-winning monograph, Enter the Animal, Cross-Species Perspective on Grief and Spirituality. So here we have another woman. This is kind of the second woman today. First woman left open, wide space. So did the last man, left wide space. So just curious as to whether there's a correlation in some ways. Let's get into the abstract, okay? I don't know. We'll see how long this one takes. This might be our last one, or maybe the one right after will be our last one. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. If you're having fun, I can stay a little longer, but it depends. Actually, no, that's not true. I have a hard stop. I just was thinking of like, what do I have to do after this? Which is several things. So now I'm like, oh, wait. Anyway, abstract. The term sentience tends to be associated with affective valence along with effectively neurosensory states. By the way, can you really figure out what this person is? As a scholar and a multidisciplinary artist. Doesn't tell me what their PhD is in. So I'm not exactly sure, other than the fact, well, I guess it would be cross-species perspective on grief and spirituality. Okay, so cross-species, okay. Anyway, the term sentience tends to be affected with effective valence along with effectively neural sensory states. In the absence of evidence for effectively latent states in plants, the use of the term sentience in the exploration of plant sensory and behavioral complexity is misleading and ethically problematic for its potential to trivialize animal sentience. So basically, you're saying, from the abstract alone, that thinking about plants as sentience negates or somehow renders silly animal sentience? Okay, this is going to be interesting. And there goes my thought on the woman thing. It just went out the window. Secondo Ortin and Calvo provide compelling evidence for capacities of plant organisms that go beyond merely hardwired reactivity, pointing towards a sensory and behavioral flexibility usually associated with animal rather than plant life. Since organisms live in dynamic, ever-changing environments, such a wealth of perceptual and responsive potential in plants comes as no surprise. I agree. I can imagine that, at some rudimentary level, the question of what it is like to be a cactus may indeed have an answer, or perhaps many, depending on the type of cactus. When used appropriately, imagination and comparisons to what we know and understand better, in this case animals, as Pessoa also points out, are helpful on many levels, e.g., when they come up with research questions. However, comparisons to animals used without adequate caution can have serious ethical implications, not only because they may put scientific quality at risk, but also because they can trivialize animal sentience and jeopardize efforts to expose and eliminate the ubiquitous violence inflicted upon non-human animals. Oh, so this is what's more important. This was the conversation. Remember the vegan conversation? The paper, what was the name of the paper? Hold on a second. Let me grab the name. The name of the paper was Plant Sentience and the Case for Ethical Veganism, where the person basically said, well, even if plants are somewhat sentient, animals are still more important. And that's what this sounds like this is going towards. Even if we question these things, we got to be careful because we can't question them in a way that it jeopardizes the fact that we're already on a path to recognizing animal sentience. So therefore, it's only worthwhile to have a conversation as long as it doesn't hurt animal sentience, because animals are more important than plants. Am I the only one that's seeing it that way? I mean, you tell me if I saw it wrong, but this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm feeling. It's coming out. Okay, I'm going to try to keep. I'm trying to keep an open mind. Let me open my mind a little. The catchy title, "Plant Liberation," likely inspired by Singer's influential book "Animal Liberation," may attract members of the public who are genuinely concerned about the possibility of plant sentience. Genuinely concerned about the possibility. Such a weirdly written sentence because it almost. I'm not going to nitpick. I'm going to calm the dominant personality of the critic. Chill. And we'll use the information to perform a critical self-evaluation towards greater personal integrity, but mostly it will be used to fuel sensationalism, misinformation, and moral laziness. How do you know? Language matters. More often than not, the term sentience is associated with affective valence, which informs ethical considerations. I remain uncomfortable with the term sentience applied to plants, especially in communication with a broader, less technically minded audience. Would that be us? Would we be the broader, less? I think she's talking about us. Broader, less technically minded audience. Because the important distinguish between affective neural sentient states and affective valenced ones is likely to get lost. One of the most fascinating attributes of plant life is its capacity for regeneration and ensuing resilience. Regeneration characterizes all life forms, but plants stand out in important ways. Before sitting down to write this commentary, I walked past a telling example, namely the green scallions growing in my garden. I cut the above ground green part off for cooking purposes, leaving the roots intact, and it always grows back. Without irreplaceable organs and with a modular design, Marcuso, I think she means Mancuso, by the way. That's Mancuso. Tells us, cited in Pollen 2013. Yeah, this is Mancuso. There's no Marcuso. Mancuso. It's just an error. Plants can lose up to 90% of their body without being killed. Yeah, that's Stefano. What that would mean, a lot of suffering for an organism capable of experiencing pain. I'm going to see where you're going with this, because talking about less technically, you are an animal person. I don't think, this is my opinion. I don't think you understand the literature very well. I mean, okay. Let me finish a sentence. Maybe I'm wrong. The organism would require a very high pain tolerance or a mechanism that quickly kicks in to numb the pain. Or perhaps we simply cannot talk about the pain the way we know it. I think it's the latter. I think it's the latter, hun. I think it's the latter. I've spent some time lately crawling on the ground with macro photographic lens. It has exposed an amplitude of the plant and animal world around me, and that was completely unknown to me. It's a world of resilience, but also a world of significant vulnerability and extinction threats. Despite the likely absence of effectively balanced sentient states in plants, I'm in agreement with moral consideration of plants and have a heightened appreciation of their natural behaviors and potentials. Substantial damage has been caused by unguarded instrumentalization. Trying to de instrumentalize life generally, as I've suggested previously, benefits everyone. This is the weirdest of all the papers we read. Because okay, you tell me, but doesn't this feel like a really weird contradiction in the way this maybe because English is not a given language based on the name. This is just an assumption, on my part. But it feels like, I'm in agreement with your last sentence in the sense, but it feels like what you're saying is we have to be careful when we talk about plant sentience in that it can't hurt the argument for animal sentience because animal sentience is more important than plant. This is what I'm hearing, folks. You tell me if I heard this right. Animal sentience is more important than plant sentience. That being said, all kinds of sentience is important because we've done so much damage to the planet that trying to not have these conversations or deny these types of conversations to anybody in overall is more harm than good. In other words, animals before plants, but before you throw out everything, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Did I get that right? That's how I understand study. Super curious as to what for being short and sweet, I think, or for that. I just think that the whole argument was kind of weird. I don't know. I think this is the kind of thing I want to throw into ChatGPT and be like, can you give me a summary to see if I got this right? I'm so curious as to how you would summarize this. So weird. So weird. Okay. Given how short that was, and we have about 10 minutes. Let's see how long this next one is. This is called Plant Sentience, Bias and Promise. Ooh, okay, hold on. Let me see. Let's see how long it is. Okay, it's another really super short one. So let's do it. Let's do it. Plant sentience, bias and promise. Yeah. Let's get into it. Oops. Hold on. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Let's get down on it. Get down on it. Okay. Another woman. Let's see what this one comes up to. Plant sentience, bias and promise. Okay. Sidney Carl's Diamante, depending on what language that is. And is from the Department of Philosophy. So we have another philosopher, a postdoctoral fellow in Zukunftskolleg. I'm studying German, but I'm not there yet. Has studied consciousness and cognition in octopi. Her current research includes examining bipolar disorder from a physiological perspective. How do you go from octopi to? I'm assuming that the bipolar is not in the octopi. I'm assuming that the bipolar is in humans. It's just my guess. We shall find out. So we have another philosopher who studies consciousness. Whichever side of the debate, so this is called plant sentience, bias. Whichever side of the debate one chooses, plant sentience is a fertile research area that challenges received views and assumptions, generates novel insights, and suggests new ways that felt states thrive. My commentary discusses methodological and philosophical implications. Mind you, Paco Calvo himself is a philosopher, so this is interesting. It's like a tete-a-tete. Background beliefs and biases. The debate on whether plants are or can be, Oh, I just got something in my eye. Okay, there we go. The debate on whether plants are or can be sentient highlights how much beliefs about felt states and about which species can have them can be influenced by philosophical, cultural, and non-empirical factors. Secundo Ortin and Calvo point out, I should just call them SO and C or something like that, point out that one of the reasons plants have not been considered cognizers, dating back to Aristotelian thought, was that they thought to be unable to control their own movement endogenously. This notion has held sway ever since, but many now refute by video evidence on pole climbing by beam shoots. Similarly, human infants and non human animals had also thought incapable of feeling or thinking on the basis of assumptions made before the invention of the technology to observe and measure behavioral and neurobiological correlates of internal psychological life. Only recently have such beliefs begun to be challenged scientifically. Alongside investigating whether plants may have the capacity for sentience, the soundness of the reason for doubt must also be evaluated. In other words, don't be biased. That's me. I'm biased. I'm biased. I start with the assumption that plants are sentient. Otherwise, that is my bias. I am okay with that. I have no problem because there are plants that start on the other end. Only recently have, oh, hold on, connection unstable part again. Hi, how are you? How you doing? How's it going? There we are. Sorry. Only recently have such beliefs begun to be challenged scientifically, alongside investigating whether plants may have the capacity for sentience. The soundness of the reasons for doubt must also be evaluated. It is important to be aware of how long-standing doubts about both invertebrate sentience and plant sentience may be influenced by vertebrate-based bias. Vertebrate-based bias. I think that's the beautiful term. And every time somebody says something to me about a human neurobiologist, I'm going to say that you have vertebrate-based bias. I'm rating. Hold on, I want to write this down because it's such a great vertebrate-based bias. That's such a great term. It is too easy to be influenced by our own case when studying psychological life in non-human species. Oh, that's what I've been saying for the longest time. That's why I said plant communicators in a kind of more spiritual realm have a bit of a leg up. Okay, so we can be biased too. I agree with that. We can be biased. But there are ways to check the bias. Remind me to tell you some stories about the communication with the plant world course that I teach here in Damanhur, because that has helped me work through a lot of biases and to get additional information to prove or to confirm, not prove, confirm other thoughts. Caution on both sides. Anthropomorphic bias is an ever-present risk in the study of plant cognition. Agreed. Perhaps even greater than in the study of animal cognition. Disagree. I think it exists in all of them. Advances in technology, research methods, and comparative biology have allowed us to make comparisons between non-human and human animal behavior and cognition on the basis of neural, anatomical, and functional similarities. In plants, we have not yet found stable points of similarity for analogies or homologies, because there might not be as many as we think there are. It is so far highly speculative either to affirm or to deny sentience or cognition in plants. I'm okay with that. That's a sensible approach. Guiding principles are needed. Clarifying terminology is just the beginning. Definitions and criteria are based on animal models and may need to be adjusted to fit plants. May need to be adjusted to fit plants. I agree. Neurobiology. Secondo Orting and Calvo do not believe that it is useful to debate whether neurobiology is the most appropriate term for organisms that lack neurons and synapses. However, this issue may merit its investigation in its own right. It has been investigated. I have got about 10 to 15 papers. Go look at the first, 6 months. All of the debates. Apart from animal models may need to be modified for understanding plant function, may be the starting point. Although there may be similarities between animal neurobiology and plant neurobiology, quotes, at the molecular level, do these structures remain analogous at higher functioning levels? Good question. And I think that it could be a really interesting thing to have both paths. The paths where you do go and start from animal neurobiology and the path where you don't, and see where they both end up. I think that could be cool. Philosophical issues were established that plants are sentient. I was like, woo, she's saying that. So if it were established that plants are sentient, certain philosophical issues would arise. In addition to the moral and ethical thank you for somebody actually freaking putting it on paper. In addition to the moral and ethical quandaries being pointed out by other commentators. They're not pointing them out. They're not pointing them out. We're pointing them out. We're pointing them out. Plant sentience would raise questions about the nature of plant experience. For example, kin recognition in plants would raise the question of whether individual plants have a sense of self that allows them to distinguish between themselves and others. The ability of plants to direct their root growths, to allocate resources, communicate between conspecifics and non-conspecifics, and influence the behavior of non-conspecifics all lead to the question of whether a plant is an agent. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Can plants form concepts? Can we attribute knowledge to them? I don't know. There's a whole mess of plant communicators that would tell you yes. But again, that's not scientific. There are only a few of the philosophical questions that would arise if they are proved to be convincing evidence. These are only a few of the philosophical questions that would arise if we were proved to be convincing evidence of plant sentience. Yes, that's it. That's it. See, I have to give her credit for that. She's bringing up some of the discussions, this is, I think, a very light way of saying, hey, these are maybe some of the reasons why people can't see this argument clearly. That's my interpretation, my only interpretation. And I think that that's interesting. Super interesting. Okay, so we have now gone through today. Plants lack the functional neurotransmitters and signaling pathways required for sentience in animals. Basically a hard no sentience, hard no. Stress, an adaptive problem common to plants and animal science. Hey, here are these two things that are kind of similar. Maybe there is a possibility to work and use these different models. 3, sentience, back to the science from the words. Are we using the words correctly? And do these words really take us where we want to go? Because it sounds like you might be using these words incorrectly, and therefore they are not going to take you where exactly you want to go. Then, from animal to plant sciences, is there, maybe there isn't, maybe there isn't. This feels like we're having an apples and oranges and we're trying to call them the same. That's what it is. Language matters. Hey, plants are important. We should kind of look into their sentience, as long as it doesn't take away from animals, because animals are more important. That was what that one was all about. And then plant sentience, bias, and promise, which is, hey, we need to check our biases and promises. Like, we can't overpromise, but we also need to make sure our biases aren't stopping us. It sounds like we might not have the adequate tools, but I think we can look at adapting some of the tools that we have, and maybe we will get there. That's what it seems like it is. Okay. So that's where we are. We have about, let's see, how many papers are there left? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And then there is the final, so 20. Okay. So folks, we're going to be here for a while. Not today, obviously, but we will be meeting next week to continue on this conversation and to see exactly where this is that it takes us. I really do think it's fascinating. I think it's completely fascinating, and I love where we're going with it. I think that there is so much to explore in this topic, and I'm so happy that we're doing this together. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I really want to hear what it is that you think about these papers. Please leave me a comment. Remember to do all the YouTube stuff, the things that they tell you to keep doing, the like and the subscribe, and to make sure to help others find this conversation, especially if you found this conversation was important. But your comments really help me. It helps me understand what you're thinking. Am I making any sense? Should we be thinking about it in other terms? And that's also the reason why we have the Naturally Conscious Community. So if you go to naturallyconsciouscommunity.com, of course, it's going to be in the description. I'm going to link it all there. Inside of the Naturally Conscious Community, you have a place where we can be getting into some of these discussions, and specifically on how do these discussions change the way we co-create with plants, right? Wherever you are on this argument, really all of the reason we're getting into this is to understand that we as beings of nature, how is it that we relate to other beings of nature? And that also means, how do we co-create with these beings of nature? How is it that I enter into the wisdom of my inner plantness and then bring that inner plantness out into the world in relation with other plants as well as with animals, and that includes humans as well. So there's a huge benefit to us continuing this conversation, to explore, to stretch, to push, to move into all kinds of other conversations that touch on this idea of plant sentience, but also that touch on the idea that there is an inner plantness that is being experienced by plants themselves, and that I, as a being of nature that arose, that evolved from being a plant, also have a stillness, a presence, an awareness that I can grow from. And the naturally conscious community is the place where we are going to continue to have those discussions. So I really invite you to join us over there. Lots of super cool people, all of our sprouts that we're doing some really neat things, from the book club to the writing group to the mini voyage with plants to, our plant inspired masterclasses and different courses. But more importantly, it's the discussion and the relationships that get formed over there. So I really hope that you will join us. So over here, like, subscribe, check out the podcast, Reconnect with Plant Kingdom, with Plant Wisdom, not Reconnect with the Plant Kingdom is one of my courses, so I sometimes get the names confused. Reconnect with Plant Wisdom, which is my podcast, and please enjoy, experience that, and also give me your feedback. And really, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this journey and for allowing me to, really bring this information to you, and also to, work with you and help you integrate this. If there is anything that I can do, I'm here. I'm here to support you in any way, whether that's, with one-on-one work, and to really bring that nature inspired, to bring out of you that nature inspired inspiration, because you are that being of nature. So that's it for this session. We will be back here next Friday, same bat place, same bat time. I think I need a plant reference for that better than the one I had right now. But, we're going to be here. And remember, in the meantime, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. That's it for me. I'm out. Bye.